Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am doing a little Overwatch League news recap. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm going to try to fly through a lot of it. Some of it is pretty short and pretty brief, some of it I'll spend a little bit more time on. But that is what is on the docket for today. So let's talk about the first piece of news, which is that today is my birthday. Woo! Turning 22, baby. Let's go. Now let's get into some actual news that's really relevant. First thing I want to talk about is the Hangzhou Spark have made two roster moves, the first of which was they have released GodsB. Of course, he was with the team when they were created back in 2019, so seeing him go is a real big shame. I guess technically he was with the team when they were started in 2018, so he's been with the team for the past 2 seasons, going into this 3rd season with the team, but they have parted ways, mainly, I just think because he doesn't really have a spot on this team, with Shy on the roster playing very, very well. Not really a spot for GodsB anymore, so hate to see him go, but I think he may be able to find a home in the Overwatch League again, though only time will tell. The other move is the Hangzhou Spark released Takoyaki. I made an entire video on this, so I'll link to that in the description and in the cards. And at the end of this video, if you want to see that one, because I made a whole video on that one, but that is also what the Hangzhou Spark have done. So those are the 2 moves from them. In other roster moves, we have the Houston Outlaws announcing they have released Hydration. Of course, he was with the team last season, and he was back to DPS this season. Only played about a match, I think, maybe not even a full match. Played a little bit this season, but didn't see a lot of playtime. I don't know if he'll find another spot in the Overwatch League. Not a lot of teams I can think of that really would need a player like Hydration right now, but I know he talked about returning to streaming for a little while, so we'll see what happens. But I always loved Hydration. He was a great player to watch. A huge fan of his, and I'm hoping for the best for him and his future, because he is a very good player. Someone who I respect a lot and I think has been a really big part of the Overwatch scene. Of course, I'll remember Hydration Man and Gladius from the good old Blizzard Arena days. So, sucks to see Hydration go, but wish him all the best. Next thing I want to talk about is that Striker has retired and ANS has returned to the San Francisco Shock. These 2 moves kind of go hand in hand. It's obviously happened a little while ago now, so it's not breaking news, but I haven't really had much of a chance to talk about it in a video. I've been saying for a long time that Striker was the biggest piece to this San Francisco Shock team. Back in 2019, when they announced that they had added Striker, I thought it was a huge addition. I thought it was such a great addition. I think that Striker was such an incredible player during his time in the Overwatch League. I know Sideshow has talked about several times where he thinks that Striker and Hawksall are the only 2 players that you look at right now who they're the best players that have retired from the Overwatch League. You had players like Fissure who were really good, but not as consistently good, and he had his ups and downs. You had players like Libero who were really solid players, but they weren't like all-time greats. Hawksall, Striker, these are 2 all-time greats who have retired from the Overwatch League, have moved on from the Overwatch League. You hate to see them go. Striker's retirement, obviously huge for the San Francisco Shock. Yes, ANS comes back, and you're getting some really high-quality hit scan play. You're getting one of the best Widowmakers in the league, if not the best Widowmaker in the league. Incredible Ashe, incredible McCree. Like, you're getting that. But what you're losing on that Tracer side definitely hurts. And you're losing somebody who you just know is such an incredibly talented player, whose presence just completely changes games. In terms of what this means for the Shock, in my own opinion, I think it really isn't going to be as bad as I think what it seems like on the outside. I think what you lose in Striker, you have pretty much 70% of that in Glister. So I think that that's really good. Where they were struggling the most this season was with the hit scan play and the long-range hit scan, the sniper play. They didn't seem to want Glister on that role very well, or very much. It didn't seem most comfortable on it. When I think of Glister, I think of his Tracer, so I think him being able to kind of fill that role that Striker held, and now have ANS to play that specific dedicated long-range hit scan, I think that'll actually help the Shock out a lot. I think it solves some of their issues, and so I like this move. You know, I don't like that in order for us to get here, we had to see a great player retire, but it happens sometimes, so it is what it is. We go to the next piece of news. The Guangzhou Charge made a couple of moves, adding new coaches. They added Sungwoo as the new head coach. He coached with the Guangzhou Charge, I believe, back in 2019, and maybe even 2020. Was let go. He was one of those coaches that joined the LA Valiant, and then they imploded. So Sungwoo's the new head coach, but they also brought in Extra as a coach, who formerly coached for the Guangzhou Charge Academy team. So some interesting coaching moves there. Sungwoo is someone I've heard a lot of great things about. Packing 10 obviously spoke very highly of him. He was with the Charge for a while, so they clearly think pretty highly of him. Extra is one that I've seen some mixed things on. Some interesting bits of information on him. I've heard some people say they're not a huge fan of him, and they thought he was going to be the head coach, but as the assistant coach, things are a little bit different. So I'm curious to see this Guangzhou Charge team play. We did see them this past weekend. I think Sungwoo was their head coach. They beat the NYXL. They got completely obliterated by the Seoul Dynasty, but the Seoul Dynasty are really good, so you kind of expect that. So I'm curious to see how this Charge team does going forward. You put Sungwoo in kind of a bad spot. He has half a season to make an impression, but I'm excited to see what he does, because I think that seeing people get extensions or get those good positions that they deserve based on their kind of time spent with teams is always nice to see. So good moves from them, I think, but we'll see how well they end up being long term. Next, I want to talk about the Toronto Defiant extending Aspire for their, I believe, at least through the rest of the Summer Showdown. I don't know if it was through the rest of the season, but I know they said at least until the end of the Summer Showdown, they are going to keep Aspire around. I've really enjoyed everything we've seen from him. He was really good on those hit scan players back in the June Joust, and then we saw him pop off on the Tracer in the Summer Showdown. So I think this is a really great move. I love seeing Aspire pop off. It's a big deal for NA contenders. One of the biggest storylines coming into this season was that there was one player that came out of North American contenders, and that was Juby. I mean, he was even coming out of collegiate, so he wasn't really coming out of NA contenders. So there were no players who were rookies coming into this season who were in NA contenders. Or if they were like EU talent, but I'm pretty sure everybody was coming out of EU contenders. And now we have someone who comes out of NA contenders and not only is getting a lot of playtime, looks really, really good in the league. So that's a huge thing to see. I love watching him play. I think his playstyle is really, really good. He won Player of the Match twice this weekend, and I actually think it was not unwarranted. The thing I wish we could get an interview with him, but obviously I don't think he has a camera because they don't have a webcam ever set up for him. So hopefully Aspire gets a webcam soon so we can get an Aspire post-game interview, because I'd love to hear from him, because I think he's such a fun player to watch and I want to hear more from him. I always like hearing players who join mid-season. I always get to see kind of what they do. So I really like Aspire. If he is with the Defiant the rest of the season, that's pretty cool. If not, I hope he gets bagged somewhere else. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the offseason when a lot of the American Tornado guys are old enough to join the league. Obviously, OG is the big one, but then you also have players who will potentially go with him. Your Hydrons. Who else is on that team? And Ultraviolet's not old enough, though he'll be old enough by, I think, February of next year, or April of next year. April, I think, of next year. And then you have Speedily, not old enough, but most of the players in the roster are old enough, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that's where Aspire comes from, so that's what I'm going to keep my eye out on, see where he ends up, and see what happens there. In other news of player movement, Kevster, we know now, is in Los Angeles, as well as FunnyAstro and Shockwave are now in Korea, so those are rosters that are, in the Gladiator sense, at full strength, in the Fusion sense, still waiting on Poco, but that's good to see. Happy that the players are finally getting back to where they're supposed to be, and we're going to see some teams at full strength, everybody together, which is always nice to see. I want to talk real quickly about these reports about the NYXL coming out from Halo of Thoughts. I would like to usually talk exclusively about things that are confirmed, but just in this case, I will talk about these because Halo of Thoughts is reports on the NYXL, or I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, he has never gotten an NYXL report wrong. It's one of the teams that he has a very good connection with, so this one's interesting to me. So the NYXL reported to be signing Kalios to their tank line as another off-tank, as well as Undine as an assistant coach. Both of them were with O2 Blast, though Kalios is currently with WGS Phoenix. But he had played alongside Yakpung this most recent time that Yakpung was in Contenders, and so there's some connection there. And the rumor, or the, I guess, report is that the reason why the NYXL are signing Kalios is because Yakpung is their shot caller. He is the leader for this team, and so in order to kind of try to support him, they're going to give him someone who he's comfortable playing alongside, has a lot of experience alongside, in hopes that maybe that will help this team out. Plus, you bring in Undine, who coached, who worked with Yakpung for a little bit of time. It wasn't a ton of time, but did work with Yakpung at least a little bit to try to bolster this coaching staff, because the belief is that the NYXL are not happy with their coaching staff so far and want to add some new voices to it, I guess, add some new pieces to it. So it's interesting. I still think that a main tank signing would be good. Obviously, as I've talked about a million times, there aren't that many main tanks, so now that Takoyaki's released, that could be different. We'll see what happens over time. If either of these things happen, if any of these things happen, who knows? But I think it's interesting. I think adding Kalios to kind of support Yakpung, because he's your shot caller, makes sense. Whether or not it is going to ultimately help, we'll only, know with time. But I'm concerned about the longevity of this move, just because I don't think Yakpung is the answer for the future. And I think knowing that Takoyaki is now available, if I'm New York, I mean, I make a move to try to get him, or at least trial him and see if he's better than what Yakpung is. But I guess we'll see what happens with New York going forward, because they are an odd team, though I think they would be much better if they had a more solid tank line. So I will reserve any judgment for what these moves may mean until we see what the full extent of the moves are. But the final thing I want to talk about is something that I could dedicate an entire video to, but I just want to talk about it here today. This news is a couple weeks old now at this point in time, but I wanted to talk about the news that RunAway has disbanded. If you are not someone who follows Overwatch Contender very closely, and let me tell you something, I don't have a history of following Contender super closely. Like, I understand if people don't watch it, but if you watched Korean Contenders closely, if you watched the early days of competitive Overwatch, the Apex days, the pre-Overwatch League days, pre-Overwatch Contenders days, if you watched those days of Overwatch, you would know who RunAway is. And you've probably heard the name even if you've never seen Contenders, because RunAway produced some of the greatest players in Overwatch history. I mentioned Hangzhou before. He's a product of RunAway. Gangnam Jin, Yaki, Hisu, Mag. Who else? I mean, there's tons of players. Obviously, Slime. Twilight is a member of that RunAway roster, at least for a time. Janu was on the RunAway roster, that entire Vancouver Titans roster from 2019, with the exception of Repel was on RunAway. So this is a team with a massive history in Overwatch, and they really did produce a lot of the best players that Overwatch has ever seen. And so the news that they've disbanded, or at least that they've left Overwatch, I believe they still have a League of Legends team. I could be wrong, but I know at one point in time they did have a League of Legends team. Whether or not they still have it, I don't know. But it is something they don't have a team anymore. I can tell you that. So they've basically disbanded entirely, which it was basically all out of pocket. It was a really, really interesting team and organization out in Korea. And so it stinks to see them go. It definitely is a huge problem if you can't keep some of these long-term teams that have been around forever that are cornerstones of your esport. If those teams start to leave, you got to really start questioning whether or not you really are supporting your esport. Because with the way it works, it just doesn't really seem valid for a lot of teams to stay in the tier 2 scene when there's just not really any support for it. And it's just kind of a waste, because you know that your players are basically just in a farm system, which is, I mean, that is what tier 2 is in general, right? It's a farm system. But when the league became what it is now, and now RunAway isn't one of the teams that is fighting for like a top spot, like, they don't own a spot in the Overwatch League. It's too expensive, right? They could never own one of those spots. I'd love and hope that Runner and Flowerven have a future in esports, whether it's Overwatch or another esport. I don't know what their plans are for the future, but they have had such an impact on Overwatch as an esport and the entire history of this game. And so, of course, just thank you, Runner and Flowerven. I know you're not watching this video, but they deserve a ton of credit for what they have done for Overwatch as an esport. The Overwatch League would not be what it is today without RunAway. So, hate to see them go. It really is a huge loss for the Overwatch community. But that's it for the news for today. Lots of different little things I wanted to cover, but got through them all. So, hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on any of the stories I talked about today. And yeah, so hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.